Hello, my name is Eva Primer. I'm from the Finnish Environment Institute, where I'm the research director, and I'm also docent at the University of Helsinki in environmental policy. I'm a forester by background, and environmental policy and governance has been sort of my area of research. And I'm a member at the International Resources Panel of the United Nations as well, which is a panel that's kind of like an expert panel. So I will talk about biodiversity conservation and how to govern biodiversity conservation so that you can orient towards your next steps of looking into policy. So when we think about global biodiversity conservation, we often look at climate change policy as a bit of a benchmark. There is almost jealousy among those working with biodiversity policy and working with other global environmental policy areas, because the climate change policy has been so successful in mobilizing people and action, and in committing to a 1.5 degree target that everyone shares and that actually guides action in that direction all over the place. So companies, cities, even finance or insurance, they have all started to look into how to change their activities so that they would be working towards combating climate change. And people are really motivated as well. So why is it so difficult for other areas like biodiversity conservation or natural resources governance to get this kind of global commitment and global excitement like climate change has? There have been global targets to halt biodiversity loss for a very long time. We don't have global natural resources goals, but there is an understanding that natural resources are scarce. This perhaps has to do with biodiversity and also natural resources being fairly context specific, so they differ across the globe. So your ecosystems are not comparable between one area and another area. And so the different functions of the ecosystem differ, the different features, the species compositions differ, but also the meaning that people put onto these ecosystems and the uses that people have, the ways that people use the ecosystem differ across the different contexts. So it's quite hard to think of sort of a uniform unit to govern for biodiversity. Biodiversity loss is caused by humans and biodiversity is governed by humans. And so the different type of human action that changes biodiversity actually has to do with resource use and land use. So when we extract resources, when we extract biomass or we take water, or we take timber from the environment, or we produce food, we're actually degrading biodiversity. And so much of the biodiversity degradation is this kind of gradual, but then when we change the area, we build new cities, we actually wipe out biodiversity in huge amounts. And this generates the endangeredness of species and habitats. So perhaps we should look into that use, land use and natural resources use more. Indeed, out of biodiversity loss, almost 90% is caused by resource use. So both resource use in the landscape, so food production, forestry, and also resource use in more point-like settings, for example, minerals extraction. So resource use is a major cause of biodiversity degradation. Where do we need those resources then? We need them for our food, for our housing, for the different sort of systems that we live with, the socio-technical systems that humans have constructed and that our life is about. So how the policies have then started to recently frame biodiversity conservation or environmental conservation has been to look at transition, actually transforming these our social and socio-economic systems towards being more sustainable. And so the systems are our food system or our energy system or the way the cities are constructed, the industrial systems, all of these that use resources and that have evolved and have been designed to serve our benefits or serve us and our lifestyles. If we want to change these systems, we actually have to work with these systems. And to govern biodiversity, looking at the sort of social transition or socio-economic transition ways, we need to depart a little bit from the traditional ways of looking at governance. So traditionally, governance has been governing biodiversity or natural resource use has been about limiting activity, designing regulations, putting limits on what you can extract, and then actually putting sanctions on those who exceed these limits. So this has been the traditional way. Now, if we think about how to work with the socio-economic and socio-technical systems, we should work more with the system itself, work with the people and work with the ways in which this system functions, and we should innovate and learn. And we should use information and incentives so that we can get the system to evolve and transform on its own as well. And in this work, we should look at system transitions that happen elsewhere and outside. For example, the industrialization is a big transformation or transition that we have seen. But for example, digitalization is an interesting point of comparison. We see digitalization everywhere, and digitalization also influences how natural resources are extracted and how they are traded in the world. And we should look into these systems, how they evolve, and also try and influence these systems to be more sustainable with information and incentives. And it's very important that we actually look at how the socio-technical systems evolve and don't just look at biodiversity conservation at the sort of ecosystem end and try and understand this entire system's impact on biodiversity. Coming to the end, I would like to just go back to thinking what the ecosystems were and what the people living in the ecosystems and with the systems were that I said at the start. If we want to work with biodiversity conservation so that people actually get engaged, we have to talk in much more local ways. We often talk about biodiversity as a bit of a global problem, and we have global biodiversity loss, and we have so much biodiversity degradation, so many endangered species in the world. But how people could get motivated about biodiversity conservation and governing biodiversity would be if we were addressing a little bit more local settings, because nature is very important for people, and there are a lot of professionals who actually work with the ecosystems and the habitats in practice in their local settings. Sort of my take-home message is that governance is about people and organizations. It's about rules and collaboration, and this is what you should work with. And also that the shared goals like that of climate change actually seem to mobilize a lot of different action, and we should look into how we can develop this kind of globally shared goals that everyone would actually genuinely share.